So, I finally watched The Mandalorian Season 1, and it's really good. I was expecting it to be decent at best, but I actually ended up really enjoying the show a lot more than I thought I would. And I'm really glad I can finally say that about something Star Wars related, because I'm going to be honest, after The Rise of Skywalker last year, I was kind of getting a bit tired of Star Wars, which is a shame because I thought the series came back with so much energy and such a massive oomph with The Force Awakens and Rogue One. But over the years, the series has just declined into what I can basically call a bit of a mess, and I just lost all that love I had for the series, thanks to Force Awakens and Rogue One, had just completely gone. Which is one of the reasons why I haven't watched The Mandalorian until now. The other reason being that we haven't got Disney Plus until very recently in the UK, therefore we weren't able to watch it at the same time as people in the States. But my other reason was that I kind of wanted to take a bit of a break from Star Wars related stuff for a bit of a while, because you had The Rise of Skywalker, which was as disappointing as that was. You had Solo: A Star Wars Story the year before, which was just as disappointing. And to top it all off, on top of all that, people were still not shutting up about The Last Jedi and how much that ruined Star Wars. So yeah, last year, and just like coming out of The Rise of Skywalker, it was just a bit of a toxic minefield, the Star Wars fan base was, and I was just getting a bit sick and tired of Star Wars for a bit. So I'm glad I've had a bit of breathing room between watching The Rise of Skywalker and watching this, because I think that gap of not doing anything Star Wars related or not watching anything Star Wars related has given me time to kind of reevaluate my perspective on the series, and I can kind of come back into it with some fairly fresh eyes again, so I'm not having to wade through all the shit of the past couple of movies. I can just watch this with a fresh pair of eyes, and I've got to say, The Mandalorian is up there with Rogue One and The Force Awakens as one of the best things Disney has produced since they have owned the property of Star Wars. Unlike the new sequel trilogy, The Mandalorian knows exactly the path it wants to go down and how it wants to execute it. And that is probably one of the best things I can say about The Mandalorian, among many other things. But it was just refreshing to see a Star Wars related property where the people behind it knew exactly what they were doing from the start, middle and end. And you can tell that they know exactly where they want to take season 2, and I just love that whole aspect of the show. Jon Favreau and his team have a very clear vision for this show, and it shows. Everything from the casting of Pedro Pascal as the Mandalorian to the way the show looks, just everything feels very specific, and as if like, okay, this is how we want to do it and the way we want to do it, and no one's going to tell us otherwise. And like I said, it really shows, and the show is just really enjoyable from start to finish. And there is one thing that I really liked about the show that you don't really see much with most, TV shows nowadays, unless it's something like an anthology series. This show does have an overarching story throughout the season, but for the majority of the episodes, they are just self-contained stories that the character is stuck in. Every so often, you come back to the overarching storyline, which is the Mandalorian is choosing to look after what we all know as Baby Yoda, because he was meant to give it to a client, but he didn't know what the client was going to do with it, therefore he is taking his responsibility of Baby Yoda, and is kind of going against the rules because of this. And every so often it does go back to this main story arc. I would say the first 3 episodes and the last 2 episodes are fully revolving around that main story arc. The rest of the episodes kind of follow their own thing, occasionally coming back to this main story. But I think that's a very interesting way to do it, and it does make it feel quite refreshing in a sense, because maybe you don't want the whole series to focus on this one story, because even though it is an interesting story, it's such a simple one that it could get old very quickly. So the fact that you have these self-contained stories scattered throughout the series helps it maintain its freshness and just keeps you, interested and intrigued as the series goes on. Like I said a minute ago, Pedro Pascal is brilliant as the title character, and he's able to convey a lot of emotion whilst wearing a helmet for almost the entirety of the show. He takes it off once for a tiny little moment in the last episode, but throughout the entire show, he's pretty much consistently wearing that helmet, and he's able to convey a threatening persona, but also a lot of emotion at certain points, just through the turn of the head, which the helmet is in. And that's really impressive. The fact that you are able to convey these specific character traits and emotions just through head turns and the directing of the helmet, not the face, is very impressive. And he really makes the most out of such a limited thing that he has to work with. But also the supporting cast are very good as well. You have Taika Waititi, who plays this bounty hunter droid who later gets repurposed for a different means later in the series. And he's really good. He does supply some humour to his character, but overall I thought his character was really cool, and the arc that droid went on was quite interesting. And he kind of does redeem himself in the end, which I thought was quite sweet. Gina Carano was also really good as this ex-rebel soldier who the Mandalorian already knows about. And yeah, she was really good, and she actually ended up being one of my favourite characters in the whole show. That and Carl Weathers' character was also really good, and the way he constantly bounces between different morals as to whether he needs to help the Mandalorian or whether he's against the Mandalorian. I thought that whole aspect of the show was quite interesting, because even though it's a side character, you can tell that he's conflicted with the job he has to do and how he feels personally as a friend towards the Mandalorian. And I thought that whole aspect was, again, quite interesting, especially for a side character. Also, I love how the Mandalorian is shot. It's very slick and stylish while still feeling very Star Warsy, but there's also a bit of grittiness and intensity to it that you'd only really get in something like a Western, therefore blending the whole Star Wars and Western tones pretty seamlessly together. And I also really, really love the score for this show, because it doesn't feel Star Warsy at all. It feels like its own thing, and considering what The Mandalorian is trying to go for, I think it works really, really well. Because a lot of other Star Wars related things, the music always feels like it's trying to copy John Williams' scores for the original trilogy or the prequels. But this feels like its own thing and fits the tone of the show just right. It's hopeful, it's got instruments we haven't really heard in Star Wars music before, and there is also a tinge of darkness in the score that really is elevated in a few specific moments throughout the show's run. In regards to the show in general, there are only 8 episodes, which means you can get through it really, really quickly. But some of my favourite episodes out of that small selection of 8 would have to be the first episode, because that is a good introduction to this underground world of bounty hunters, and also gives you some really cool moments in that episode that really work. And I was quite interested to find out that one is directed by Dave Filoni, who, if you don't know, primarily worked on the Star Wars The Clone Wars animated TV series. And it's quite interesting to see him actually directing something live action for once, and I thought he did a pretty good job with that first episode. He does direct another episode later on in the series, but unfortunately that ended up being one of the weaker episodes of season 1, which was a bit of a shame. But what he does with the first episode is very impressive. Another one of my favourite episodes is The Prisoner, because again, it just sums up that whole self-contained story aspect of the show really, really well. And out of all the episodes that focus on a self-contained story, I do think that is the strongest one, because you're introduced to a cast of characters that are all unique and very, very interesting to watch and are quite entertaining at the same time. But also, overall, it just feels very well executed throughout that episode, and it just feels very tight. That is the best thing about that episode, I think, just because the whole thing is executed in a very tight and precise manner, that there is no filler in that episode at all, and it doesn't really need it. It just gets to the point of the episode and just does what it's there for, and I thought that was really fantastic about that episode. The other highlight for me, which actually probably is my favourite episode of this entire season, is the season finale, which is called Redemption. This one is just so good, because, especially considering how the second to last episode left off on such a cliffhanger, and the way everything just pays off in this final episode. It's just very, very satisfying. And funnily enough, this one is actually directed by Taika Waititi himself, and he really does a good job with this cast of characters and making them work to the fullest of their potential in such a tense scenario, but also has a good understanding of just placement, action, and how to balance the two between character moments and in-your-face action, which does really work for the sake of the episode. But I do think my favourite episode in the whole series is that final one, just because it brings everything together in a very climactic and satisfying way. If I had to pick out some weaker episodes, I mean, like I said, episode 5, which is the second episode that Dave Filoni directs, called The Gunslinger, that one it's enjoyable when you're watching it, but the more you look back on it, the less it just really isn't that eventful. Whereas something like The Prisoner, like I said, is very tight and precise and has a very clear start, middle, and end. Whereas The Gunslinger just kind of doesn't know where it wants to go until it reaches its end, and just kind of feels a bit, it doesn't feel as impactful as some of the other episodes are in the series. The other weakest episode, if I had to choose, would probably be the one that Bryce Dallas Howard directed, which is called The Sanctuary, or just Sanctuary, actually. It's, again, a decent episode. None of the episodes in this series are straight up bad, it's just some are better than others, and unfortunately this one is fairly weak. I'm afraid to say it, but it just is. It's essentially just a retelling of the plot of Seven Samurai, but just, plonked in Star Wars. And like I said, it works for the sake of the episode, but there's nothing impactful about the whole thing once you've finished it. I mean, what else can I really say? The Mandalorian is a brilliant show where Disney finally know what they're doing right from the word go, and that's really satisfying to see, especially after a whole trilogy of a not thought out storyline of where they don't quite know what they're doing with it, and seeing this show actually know what it's doing and know where it wants to go is quite pleasing to see. I'm really looking forward to season 2, if and when it comes out in October. I hope it still does. But yeah, I'm really looking forward to that. If I was reviewing the show normally, then I would definitely give this like an 8 out of 10. And again, it would be more near a 9, but it's just because those weaker episodes do drag the show down a little bit. Like I said, they're not terrible episodes. I've seen a lot worse when it comes to Star Wars. But in terms of the overall quality of the show, they just feel, the weaker episodes are a lot more noticeable than the better episodes. So guys, those are my opinions on The Mandalorian Season 1. I hope you enjoyed it. Please let me know in the comments what you thought about The Mandalorian Season 1 and whether you're excited for Season 2 when it comes out in October. If you like the video, then give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. Bye.